Hi fellow logicians. Welcome to Logical Christ channel. In this video we will be reviewing another 3 logical examinations on Islamic teachings based on the Islamic sources like the Quran. Sit back and relax, we will be back after this short intro.
For us Muslims, we don't use our logic.
The thesis. The assertion of Gnostic influence in the Quran posits that certain theological concepts and narratives within the Islamic holy book bear resemblances to Gnostic thought, particularly concerning the nature of Jesus, the concept of divine knowledge, and the material world. While Islam fundamentally asserts its divine and independent origin, a critical examination of these alleged parallels can illuminate the complex historical and intellectual landscape in which early Islam emerged. Understanding these points of comparison is crucial for a comprehensive logical analysis of the Quran's relationship with earlier religious movements. Thus, Prophet Muhammad's claimed revelations from God are questionable and critics pointing to the origin of those revelations. The assertion. The Quran is explicit enough on how unique and unparalleled its verses are. We can read the challenge of the Quran to bring verses like it in Quran 2:23-24, Quran 11:13 and Quran 17:88. The prior verse states, "And if you are in doubt about what we have sent down upon our servant, then produce a surah the like thereof." To meet the challenge of the Quran, we bring up the writings of the Gnostics from the 2nd century AD. When examining the Gnostic writings, we can match multiple verses from the Quran. Historically, Islam and the revelations given to Prophet Muhammad were developing in the 7th century AD. But the beliefs in Gnosticisms, even its writings, can be dated back in the 2nd century AD. Here's Professor Craig Evans on Gnosticism.
Well, the Gnostics were a group that most scholars think emerged probably in the early 2nd century. Some scholars have tried to argue that the group got underway a little earlier than that. The Gnostics were an interesting group, a diverse group, and so we need to be cautious about lumping them all together as though they all thought and believed the same thing. But these various groups of Gnostics, from the Greek word Gnostikos, which means one who knows, and so they're the knowers. They're knowers of absolute truth, the precise opposite of agnostic, a person who says ultimate truth can't be known. Well, the Gnostics believed that they had it all figured out.
The argumentation. In Quran 4:157-158, we learn that Jesus Christ was not crucified but was taken up to heaven. The same concept derived from the Gnostics prevalent in the 7th century. Let us hear what Dr. Bart Ehrman on this.
Gnosticism, the term comes from the Greek word for knowledge. The Greek word for knowledge is gnosis, spelled with a G. Gnosis means knowledge in Greek. There were a number of Christian groups in the 2nd and 3rd centuries especially, starting out probably somewhat after the New Testament period, who maintained that Jesus brought salvation not by dying on the cross and being raised again.
To meet the challenge of Quran 17:88, we bring the following. Quran 2:34 states, "And when we said to the angels, prostrate before Adam, so they prostrated, except for Iblis. He refused and was arrogant and became of the disbelievers." This Quranic verse is like in the book of the life of Adam and Eve 14:3. Composed in the 1st century AD and part of the Jewish apocryphal texts. Quran 5:110 states, "When you design from clay like the form of a bird by my permission, then you breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by my permission." This Quranic verse is clearly derived from the infancy Gospel of Thomas 2:3-5, which is dated from the 2nd century AD. Quran 5:112-115 states, "Jesus, the Son of Mary, O Allah, our Lord, send down to us a table from heaven to be for us a festival for the first of us and the last of us and a sign from you. And provide for us, and you are the best of providers." The surahs are like we found in the Gospel of Thomas, saying 19. These writings predated the Quran, and the Gospel of Thomas was proven to be a fabrication from the Gnostics. Quran 19:29-34 states, "How can we speak to one who was in the cradle as a child?" These Quranic verses are similar to the Arabic infancy Gospel 1:2-3, which can be dated to the 5th century AD, where it detailed how baby Jesus spoke from the cradle. Quran 19:22-26, Quran 23:50 states, "And we made the son of Mary and his mother a sign and sheltered them on a high ground having a spring." These Quranic verses is identical to the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew chapter 20, dated back to the 6th century AD and a popular story in the time of Prophet Muhammad. Furthermore, there are more Quranic verses that we can match from the Gnostic writings in the early century AD. Amazingly, these Gnostic writings were dismissed by the early church and even scholars to be fabrications. Some Quranic verses have similarities from the Acts of the Youths of Ephesus from the 5th century, the Apocalypse of Peter dated from 2nd century AD, and the Gospel of James, a 2nd century creation. These similarities validates the accusations of Meccans from the time of Prophet Muhammad and was revealed in Quran 10:38. It states, "Or do they say, he invented it? Say, then bring forth a surah like it and call upon whomever you can besides Allah, if you should be truthful." The conclusion. At this juncture, we can confidently claim that we have brought enough verses and Gnostic texts to meet the challenge of Quran 1788. Also, the presented analysis suggests a direct connection between Quranic narratives and Gnostic traditions, raising questions about the ultimate origin of Islamic scripture. If, as posited, the Quran directly quotes or draws from Gnostic writings, this implies a literary and theological dependence. The argument extends to suggest that Prophet Muhammad himself was evidently influenced by Gnosticism, inferring that core Islamic tenets may have been shaped by these non-canonical Christian thought systems rather than purely divine revelation. Consequently, given the scholarly consensus that many Gnostic writings are regarded as fabrications, apocryphal, or later elaborations distinct from the foundational narratives, the conclusion is drawn that the Quran's divine authority becomes questionable. This line of reasoning posits that a text derived from, or influenced by, unauthentic or fabricated sources cannot itself claim undisputed divine origin, thus inviting a re-evaluation of its foundational claims within critical scholarship. Here's Gnostic informant and Dr. Jason Reza Georgiani discussed about the potential source of Prophet Muhammad's revelations.
That the fingerprints of some of these Parthian feudal houses and of some of these Mithraic magi are on the Quran and the prophetic mission of Muhammad. And in particular, this character Salman the Persian, Salman al-Farsi, who people who were Muhammad's detractors claimed he was the one putting the Quran into Muhammad's head, and that, you know, he was the puppet master on the scene there, right? He in particular seems to me to be connected to some of these Parthian feudal houses. And so I think that there were a lot of machinations involved at the origin of Islam that have been successfully hidden and poorly understood, and that it's possible that things got out of hand. Let me just leave it at that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like I was getting into the how they were sort of attacking the Eastern Roman Empire, but I totally can see how it's even more targeting the Persian Empire, and it explains why all of a sudden there's myths like, why does jinn end up in the Quran? Well, sure enough, in the Scythian myths, there's jinn in there. So what they're doing in these myths is they're subtly injecting stories and myths within the text that people would hear and be, oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, that makes, oh yeah, God would say that. That's got to be true. And whoever put this together, whether it was Muhammad or Salman or Ali or whoever,
It wasn't Muhammad. Muhammad was, Let me stop right there. I don't want to get you killed. I'm willing to step out and say certain things, but
I don't care. I actually know where you're going with
the guy was a moron. I'm sorry, he was a moron. And
I hear this all the time, and I think there's some truth to this. Like he was, I hear from what I'm reading and putting together, is that he sort of was a good. So he's sort of historical. He's a merchant, so he's going around from city to city. So he's a perfect target for somebody to go carry a message. If he's going from Mecca to Egypt to here to there, you got this guy, right? And apparently he was very easy to manipulate and get him to do certain things. And you got behind the scenes this Solomon guy, who is really the one putting together. He's really the voice of Allah, and if it comes down to it.
Yeah, look, partly because of materialist reductionism, which wants to dismiss everything psychic, as pseudoscience. Even in theology, there's very much that current, and has been since, like rationalist Protestant theology in the 1800s. There's a de-emphasis on miracles and an intent to interpret everything miraculous as merely symbolic in the Bible and all this, right? Partly because of that, Muhammad has been badly misunderstood, and people think that Muhammad was like some kind of genius statesman, that we're dealing with like some kind of basically let's see, what would be a good example? I mean, I don't want to say Moses, but like some great religious figure fused with Caesar, and that's Muhammad. He's like a religious prodigy, and he's also a master statesman, who can go in there and create a constitution for the city of Medina and all this business. I don't buy any of it. The guy, I believe the Muslims when they say he was illiterate. I mean, the guy was, which by the way, there were a lot of literate people back in those days. This was before the dark ages of that region, and there were a lot of literate people back in those days. All right, people they think of medieval Europe, and no, there was a lot of literacy. In any case, Muhammad did not have the education, the intellect, the training, or any of the qualifications to come up with the Quran, first of all, and second of all, to act as such an effective statesman in Medina. The guy was a puppet of various forces that sent Salman al-Farsi and sent other people to guide Muhammad. One of the hadiths, the hadiths are the oral traditions preserved by the companions of the Prophet in Islam, right? And one of the most well-substantiated hadiths talk about how these white-robed figures would regularly come to meet with Muhammad, and he would go into a tent with them and sit with them in a circle, and no one else was allowed to come in when they were visiting. And then, they would get up and leave after a while. And so, whether it was Salman al-Farsi, or whether it was these robed figures, mysterious robed figures who would come to meet with Muhammad, or whether it was a detachment of Parthian knights wearing green from head to toe, which are described as an army of angels that turned Muhammad's fortune at the Battle of Badr, I think he had a lot of help, and people really set things up for him. He was a vehicle for various unseen forces that really, changed the course of human history.
The thesis. The concept of scientific miracles, or ijaz ilmi, in the Quran posits that the text contains scientific facts that were unknown at the time of its revelation. This video will critically examine the claims of 25 alleged scientific miracles, analyzing the hermeneutical methods used to connect ancient verses with modern scientific discoveries. We will investigate whether these Quranic verses can be interpreted as a form of divine prescience, or if the claims are a result of a retrospective reading of the text. This will involve clarifying issues of vagueness, pre-existing knowledge from other civilizations, and the danger of conflating religious purpose with scientific explanation. The assertion. The concept of scientific miracles in the Quran aims to establish its divine authenticity. Conversely, even a single scientific blunder would falsify the Quran's claim to divine revelation. We acknowledge that the Quran may contain scientific realities suggested by its verses. However, we assert that those seemingly scientific claims are often possible only by stretching one's interpretation. Lastly, a well-known Muslim apologist acknowledged that the scientific miracle arguments have already been debunked.
The scientific miracles argument in the Quran got debunked. Yeah, I hope my tajweed was on point. Because we are making claims about the Quran and specific verses, and because we was, not myself, I would say, but a lot of people were very insecure because of this scientific, discoveries or whatever it may be, and we was trying to fit the scientific narrative into the Quran, which was a big mistake, because it's as if as good as we were making science the guideline for the Quran to be accepted. This is nonsense. Yeah, we take the Quran, not science. To hell with science. Science changes tomorrow, today. They talk about the Big Bang. Now there's new studies or whatever, new findings that there was no Big Bang. So my point is what? You cannot come and say this verse here is a scientific miracle, is a scientific fact. Why? Not because the Quran is wrong, because science changes, number one. Number two, who told you that verse in the Quran is talking about what you're ascribing to it? Simple as that. So that's why I repeat it one more time for my fans, those Islamophobes. The scientific argument, the scientific miracles in the Quran is debunked.
The argumentation. 1. Embryology. In Quran 23:12-14, Muslims claim that it describes the stages of human embryonic development, arguing that these descriptions align with modern embryology. This claim is sufficiently vague that their alignment with modern embryology can be seen as a retrospective interpretation rather than a miraculous scientific foresight. These descriptions could plausibly reflect macroscopic observations or common knowledge available in ancient times, potentially influenced by rudimentary embryological observations of animals. 2. The Big Bang and the expansion of the universe. In Quran 51:47 and Quran 21:30, Muslims claimed it as a parallel to the Big Bang theory, and the latter verse as a direct reference to the expansion of the universe, concepts that were only discovered in the 20th century. These claims often rely on reading modern scientific discoveries into the verse, rather than deriving precise scientific predictions from it. The language is broad enough to accommodate various interpretations, and attributing specific 20th century scientific theories to these verses requires a significant degree of hermeneutical stretching that goes beyond their plain meaning. 3. The function of mountains. In Quran 78:6-7, Muslims claim that mountains have deep roots, similar to pegs or stakes, that anchor the earth's crust and prevent it from shaking. This is seen as a reference to the role of mountains in plate tectonics, a field of geology that developed much later. The verse's language does not offer specific geological details about deep roots, isostasy, or the mechanics of plate tectonics. The idea of mountains anchoring the earth to prevent shaking can be understood as a poetic or phenomenological description of stability, rather than a precise scientific statement about crustal dynamics. Muslims need a retrospective interpretation that stretches the text beyond its literal and historical context to make it scientific. 4. Iron from space. In Quran 57:25, Muslims claim that the phrase sent down is interpreted as an indication that the iron found on Earth did not originate here but was delivered from space by meteorites. They aligned it with the scientific understanding that the iron in our solar system was formed in supernovae and then incorporated into Earth. Interpreting sent down in the context of iron as a precise scientific statement about its extraterrestrial formation or delivery is a retrospective reading. The verse's primary purpose, consistent with other uses of this idiom, is likely theological. Like all resources, the ultimate origin and power reside in the heavens. The text lacks the specific scientific vocabulary that would genuinely predict complex astrophysical processes unknown until the 20th century. 5. The barrier between waters. In Quran 55:19-20, Muslims claimed this verse as a description of a scientific phenomenon where fresh water and salt water meet but do not immediately mix due to a barrier. Attributing this verse to a precise scientific understanding of haloclines or thermoclines, which are complex oceanographic phenomena understood through modern scientific methods, is a retrospective interpretation. The verse's primary intent appears to be a poetic description of God's power in maintaining natural distinctions, rather than a detailed scientific explanation of fluid dynamics. 6. The sun and moon in orbit. In Quran 21:33, Muslims claim that this verse states that the sun, moon, and all other celestial bodies are swimming in an orbit, attributing it to modern science that the sun is not stationary but moves in its own orbit within the galaxy. In the Middle East, past civilizations developed sophisticated astronomical observations and understood that celestial bodies followed predictable paths or orbits in the sky. This knowledge predates the Quran. Attributing a precise scientific understanding of galactic motion to this verse is a retrospective interpretation. 7. Forelocks in the brain. In Quran 96:15-16, Muslims claim that the term forelock is interpreted as the frontal lobe of the brain, which is responsible for reasoning, planning, and conscious behavior. They refer to a lying, sinning forelock as a reflection of the frontal lobe's role in our moral decisions. The phrase lying, sinning forelock is idiomatic, much like saying a deceitful tongue or a greedy hand. It does not offer any specific neurological or anatomical details that would genuinely point to the frontal lobe's complex functions in moral decision-making. The connection to modern neuroscience is a retrospective interpretation. 8. The sky is a protected ceiling. In Quran 21:32, Muslims claim this as a reference to the Earth's atmosphere, which acts as a protective shield against harmful elements from space. The verse's primary emphasis appears to be on God's power in establishing the heavens as a stable and beneficial element of creation. Attributing a precise scientific understanding of atmospheric layers, ozone, or radiation belts to this ancient text is a retrospective interpretation, reading modern scientific discoveries into the Quran. 9. The deep sea darkness. In Quran 24:40, Muslims claim that this verse is seen as a description of the deep ocean, where light is completely absent below a certain depth, foreshadowing the understanding of modern oceanography. The verse uses this imagery as a powerful parable to describe the state of disbelievers, likening their spiritual ignorance and lack of guidance to overwhelming physical darkness. Attributing this verse to a precise scientific understanding of the complex details of modern oceanography is a retrospective interpretation. The language is evocative and metaphorical, serving a theological purpose to illustrate spiritual darkness, rather than providing a detailed scientific prediction about the deep sea. 10. The flight of birds. In Quran 67:19, Muslims claim that this verse is a description of the intricate mechanisms of bird flight, which are governed by specific physical principles of lift and thrust, a scientific phenomenon that was not fully understood until the principles of aerodynamics were developed. The ability of birds to fly, spreading and folding their wings, was a readily observable phenomenon in ancient times. Attributing this verse to a foreshadowing of advanced aerodynamic principles requires a retrospective interpretation that reads modern scientific knowledge into the verse. 11. The creation of everything in pairs. In Quran 51:49, Muslims claim that this verse is taken to be a broad statement about the dualistic nature of the universe, such as the pairing of male and female in living things, even the pairing of subatomic particles and other fundamental dualities in nature. The concept of mates or pairs is a very common and observable phenomenon in nature, particularly in the biological realm. This pairing is evident to any observer and was certainly known in ancient times, a concept readily understandable without modern scientific knowledge. 12. The water cycle. In Quran 23:18-19, along with other verses, claimed by Muslims as a description of the water cycle. The Quran describes how rain falls from the sky, is stored in the ground as groundwater, and then causes vegetation to grow. This is seen as a detailed and accurate account of a complex hydrological process. This understanding of the basic water cycle was common knowledge in many ancient civilizations, particularly those dependent on agriculture. The Quranic description, while accurate in its basic portrayal of these observable phenomena, lacks the detailed scientific understanding of evaporation, condensation, atmospheric circulation, and the precise quantitative aspects of the modern hydrological cycle. 13. The atmosphere is smoke. In Quran 41:11, Muslims claim that the word smoke is used to describe the initial state of the universe's atmosphere, and this aligns with the modern cosmological understanding of the early universe. Attributing this smoke to the specific, highly technical understanding of the early universe's plasma state, quark-gluon plasma, or the opaque conditions before recombination is a significant retrospective interpretation. 14. The sun's light and the moon's light. In Quran 25:61, Muslims claim that this is seen as a distinction that aligns with modern astronomy, which confirms that the sun produces its own light through fusion, while the moon merely reflects the sun's light. Ancient Greek philosophers like Anaxagoras from the 5th century BCE explicitly stated that the moon derives its light from the sun, and this knowledge was present in various forms in other ancient civilizations. While the Quranic verse is accurate in its description of observable phenomena, it does not present a scientific revelation unknown at the time. 15. The gender of the spider. In Quran 29:41, Muslims claim that the original Arabic text of this verse uses a feminine form of the word for spider, implying that it is the female spider that builds the web, a subtle scientific detail that could not have been known to an illiterate person in the 7th century. The primary purpose of this verse is clearly metaphorical and theological. Attributing a specific biological insight about spider behavior to this grammatical gender is a retrospective interpretation that stretches linguistic convention to fit a modern scientific observation. 16. The lowest land on earth. In Quran 32:4, Muslims claim that the lowest land is the lowest point on Earth's land surface. They asserted that this is a geographical fact that could not have been known to anyone in the 7th century. The Dead Sea's significantly low elevation relative to its surroundings, and its unique characteristics, would have been empirically observable to inhabitants and travelers in the region long before the 7th century CE. Attributing a detailed, modern scientific discovery to this verse relies on selecting one possible interpretation of an ambiguous phrase. 17. The 7 layers of the atmosphere. In Quran 2:29, Muslims claim that the phrase 7 heavens is a reference to the 7 layers of the Earth's atmosphere, predicting modern atmospheric science. The concept of 7 heavens is not unique to the Quran and predates Islam by many centuries. It was a common cosmological idea in ancient Near Eastern cultures, including Mesopotamian, Babylonian, and Jewish traditions. This is a retrospective rereading that superimposes modern scientific knowledge onto a phrase rooted in ancient cosmological beliefs. 18. The male determines the gender of the offspring. In Quran 75:37-39, Muslims claim that the reference to the drop of semen and the subsequent creation of the male and the female implies that it is the male sperm that determines the gender of the baby. This is a scientific fact that was unknown until the discovery of chromosomes in the 20th century. In ancient times, it was widely observed that both male and female contributions were necessary for reproduction. Various theories existed regarding the determination of sex, with some ancient Greek thinkers, like Aristotle, proposing that the male semen played a dominant role in shaping the offspring, including its sex. The Quranic verses, by mentioning a drop of semen followed by the creation of the male and the female, can be seen as a descriptive observation of the reproductive process as it was understood in a general sense, rather than a specific scientific revelation about sex determination at a chromosomal level. 19. Pain receptors in the skin. In Quran 4:56, Muslims claim that this is a reference to the pain receptors that are located in the skin, a medical fact in the modern era. It is a matter of common, observable experience that severe burns cause extreme pain initially, but if the burn is deep enough, the affected area eventually becomes numb because the nerve endings are destroyed. People in ancient times would have observed this phenomenon through injuries, accidents, and warfare. They might not have understood the microscopic biological mechanism of pain receptors, but the macroscopic reality of skin's role in feeling pain and the loss of sensation in deeply burned tissue was an empirical observation. 20. The female honeybee. In Quran 16:68-69, Muslims claim that the Arabic verbs used in this verse are interpreted as a precise detail indicating that the worker bees, which are female, are the ones who build the hives and gather the nectar. Aristotle, from the 4th century BCE, extensively studied bees and correctly noted the drone's idleness and the worker's industriousness, even if he misidentified the queen as a king. Beekeeping has been practiced for thousands of years across various ancient civilizations. Ancient beekeepers and naturalists, through close observation, would have been acutely aware that the vast majority of bees actively involved in building hives, foraging for nectar, and producing honey were of a certain type. 21. The communication of ants. In Quran 27:18, Muslims claim that this verse is cited as evidence that ants communicate with each other. Modern myrmecology has shown that ants have a complex system of communication. It simply portrays an ant issuing a warning, a concept that would be easily understood by an ancient audience as a form of communication. It is an observable phenomenon. Interpreting this verse as a precise scientific prediction of complex ant communication systems is a retrospective interpretation that reads modern scientific knowledge into a narrative. 22. The weight of clouds. In Quran 13:12, Muslims claim that the term heavy clouds is seen as a description of the immense weight of clouds, a fact that can be easily overlooked but is scientifically true. This is not a hidden scientific fact that required advanced instruments to discover. The observable phenomenon of clouds carrying water that then falls as rain logically implies that they are heavy. The Quranic verse uses accessible, descriptive language to refer to a readily apparent characteristic of certain clouds. Attributing this to a miraculous scientific revelation about the precise tonnage of water in a cloud is a retrospective interpretation. 23. The role of the wind in pollination and rain formation. In Quran 15:22, Muslims claim that the wind plays a crucial role in both the pollination of plants and the process of rain formation. Scientifically, winds carry pollen from male to female plants, and they also carry water vapor and microscopic salt crystals or dust, which act as seeds for the formation of raindrops. The verse accurately describes observable roles of wind in nature, but interpreting it as a precise scientific prediction of modern concepts like microscopic cloud seeding or the exact mechanism of wind pollination at a cellular level is a retrospective interpretation. 24. The three veils of darkness in the womb. In Quran 39:6, Muslims claim this as a reference to the three layers that protect the fetus in the womb. These are identified as the abdominal wall, the uterine wall, and the amniotic sac with its surrounding membranes, foretelling modern embryology. Interpreting three darknesses as a precise scientific description of the abdominal wall, uterine wall, and amniotic sac is a retrospective interpretation that reads modern embryological knowledge into a phrase that was likely understood in a more general, metaphorical, or observational sense. 25. The distinctness of fingerprints. In Quran 75:3-4, Muslims claim this as a reference to the uniqueness of human fingerprints, an acknowledgement of fingerprints as a unique identifying feature of every individual, a fact that was not scientifically established until much later. Interpreting "make complete his fingertips" as a direct reference to the unique identifying patterns of fingerprints is a retrospective interpretation that reads modern scientific discovery into a verse that is more broadly concerned with the divine power of resurrection and the intricate nature of human creation. There are more Quranic verses that Muslims claim as scientific miracles, based on their belief. But upon examining these verses, Muslims clearly fall prey to their own confirmation bias as well as consistent retrospective interpretations. The conclusion: in examining the claims of scientific miracles within the Quran, it becomes evident that numerous verses are observable. A critical analysis reveals a consistent pattern of interpretations often stem from confirmation bias and retrospective readings. Muslims claiming these scientific miracles tend to interpret vague Quranic passages in light of contemporary scientific knowledge, imposing scientific predictions onto the text itself. This approach often rests on the assumption that Prophet Muhammad and the people of his era were entirely unaware of basic scientific observations and ancient knowledge prevalent in other civilizations. Yet, as our arguments have demonstrated, many of the phenomena cited as miracles such as the water cycle, the general stability of mountains, or the distinction between fresh and salt water were observable or understood to some degree in antiquity. Here's Dr. David Wood with an ex-Muslim on the significance of the scientific miracles in the Quran.
The first thing or the last thing that had me attached to Islam was scientific miracles. I found, when I compared Islam to Christianity, I found many topics that Christianity has valid arguments against Islam, but I was like, how about scientific miracles? I couldn't get over that. So I had to do my own research to come to a conclusion. And I picked the most famous topics. I started with them to find for myself, not for anybody else. And when I found the truth, then that's it. It was the last thing for Islam.
So you saw problems with Islam, but there was something holding you there. Still, this idea that this had to come from God because of these scientific miracles.
Yes.
And then I guess you eventually looked into the ones you thought were the best examples of scientific miracles.
Yeah.
And so you must have concluded that they're not really scientific miracles.
Because all these years that we spent, they have been telling us, how come Muhammad knew these things before scientific discoveries? It must be God who revealed these things. And they are talking about embryology, they are talking about cosmology, they are talking about sciences in the seas, and all these things. And we read books, we saw TV programs in Morocco, we saw scholars explaining them. At school, it's part of our curriculum at school. So you grow up thinking it's for granted. There are scientific miracles in the Quran.
And that was by the way, that was the first real argument I was given for Islam. A Muslim imam sat me down to watch this video on these scientific miracles. And what I noticed over and over again, they would quote a Quran verse, and they would talk for like 5 minutes about science with all these awesome graphics. And then they would say, how could Muhammad have known all these things? And I'm looking at the verse going, is that what the verse actually said? Because I didn't catch that in the actual verse. But
yes.
Looking at all the 5 minutes of graphics and so on, you think, wow, how could Muhammad have known all that?
Let's start with the most famous one. You can read 23:12 to 14.
So embryology.
Yes, embryology. Because that's probably the most famous one.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Surah 23, verses 12 to 14. I'll read the Haleli Khan. They insert some words as far as creating man out of clay and so on. So they insert like Adam and so on. But so this is the Haleli Khan translation. And indeed we created man, Adam, out of an extract of clay, water and earth, here they put. Thereafter we made him, the offspring of Adam, as a nutfa, mixed drops of the male and female sexual discharge, that's commentary, and lodged it in a safe lodging, they say womb of the woman here. Then we made the nutfa into a clot, a piece of thick coagulated blood. Then we made the clot into a little lump of flesh. Then we made out of that little lump of flesh bones. Then we clothed the bones with flesh, and then we brought it forth as another creation. So blessed be Allah, the best of creators. Little side note, that was from Abdul Ibn Abi Sar, that blessed be Allah, best of creators.
To summarize it, we have clay, we have a drop, a sperm drop, we have a clot, a blood clot, and then we have a lump of flesh, and then we have bones, and then we cover the bones with flesh. Do you think that's something mind-blowing?
No.
Exactly. Have you seen like a skeleton by itself when anybody went to see their kid the first time and say, did you see a skeleton there? No, you never see that.
You would need it. So you're pointing out, like right here in the development, it goes from the fluid Then it becomes a blood clot.
Yes.
Then it becomes a lump of flesh, and then the lump of flesh becomes bones, and then those bones are clothed with flesh. So you're saying, when is there just bones before they're clothed with flesh?
You studied medicine, right?
I studied, yeah, I have a biology degree. That's not right.
Okay. Did they teach you these stages?
No, these are not the correct stages. It gets even worse when you go to what Muhammad said about them in the hadith, because he gives you a timeline. He says it's 40 days as the drop of fluid, and then 40 days as the blood clot, and so on. So that's like really, really wrong.
The most, I say, the argument that was really debunked this for me is when I found out the Greeks had this before the Quran.
Hippocrates, Aristotle, and then later Galen.
Galen had them the same way, and Galen was before the Quran. So it was a spread common knowledge everywhere, including Arabia. And people just thought that's the right stages of the fetus. And Muhammad just got that knowledge, put it into a verse. Where is the miracle here?
No, there's not. And you see, it's some things they knew, right? Like they understood, hey, man has sex with a woman, and it's got something to do with semen. They also thought it had a lot to do with blood, because women have a monthly menstrual cycle, and then it stops. So they're thinking in terms of blood clots. Plus, people had miscarriages and so on. So people at the time had an understanding of certain stages. When Muhammad goes beyond that, it's either clearly being copied from people like Hippocrates and Galen, or it's just wrong. But
the studying thing, when I went to the commentaries, I wanted to read more. The hadith and the commentaries, they believe that the spirit is not breathed into the fetus until he is or she is 4 months old. After 120 days, he's not alive. And that's a clear scientific error. And until now, some schools in Islam, you can have abortion before the 4th month.
I've seen Muslim politicians.
120 days.
I've seen Muslim politicians in the West say, as far as Islam is concerned, abortion is fine up through 4 months.
Exactly, because they believe he's not alive yet, based on the Quran. And this is a clear problem for Muslims they have to deal with.
So they're saying, and you pointed out, this is their go-to example of a scientific miracle in the Quran. These are stages that were already described by other people. And even in the hadith where it gives the 40 days, that's from the Talmud. So Muhammad is just hearing things from all around him and jumbling it all together. And then they say it's a miracle when, guess what? Galen got some things right. He also got some things wrong. And the wrong things all end up in the Muslim sources too.
Yes. Let's pick another one.
Okay.
You want to talk about, let's say, the Big Bang in the Quran?
Yeah, heard that one 1,000 times.
I say, have those who disbelieved not considered that the heavens and the earth were a joined entity? Joined entity, for them, it was like a tiny spot that exploded, and that's where the whole universe came from. And then we separated them and made from water every living thing. That's Surah Al-Anbiya, which is 21:30. So how do we respond to that?
Well, even looking at what it says, they're saying this corresponds to Big Bang cosmology. But if you look at what it actually says, and this was another theory that was common at Muhammad's time, it's called the cosmic egg theory. Like the heaven and earth were together as one thing, and then in creating, God separates them.
But isn't the Bible say the same? Doesn't the Bible say the same thing?
Lots of different people had the same thing.
Shamim and Ha'art, the heavens and earth were one thing. God created one thing, called it heavens and earth, and then separated them later.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. So he just copied a biblical knowledge, and they are talking about it as a miracle that nobody mentioned it before Muhammad.
And what's interesting here is they want to say that the description in the Quran of earth and heaven being separated, that's the Big Bang.
An explosion.
That's not the Big Bang, right? The earth wasn't there already with the heavens, and then they get separated. So, one, the Quran doesn't line up. They're not, in other words, a cosmologist is not going to say, yeah, the earth was already there, and then it was separated out. But two, yes, this is, other groups were saying this at the time. And so how, once again, how in the name of common sense is this miraculous scientific knowledge?
Another one they mention a lot, they say the two seas are separated by unseen barrier. And you can see it in many surahs. One of them is 55, 19, 20. In two surahs, actually, not many. He released the two seas meeting one another. Between them is a barrier, so neither of them transgresses. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's amazing. All the Quran here is saying is that, hey, over here is water you can drink, and over here is water you can't drink. Everyone knew that. When I read the commentaries, they said the barrier is land.
That's true.
There's land. So there's water you can drink over here, water you can't drink over here, and then there's land in between them. And the point is actually a decent point. Like, look at how God set things up.
Yes.
But they're saying, no, this is talking about a barrier between fresh seas and so on, and they get all technical. It's like, he's saying something very simple here.
They play on words most of the time. And they say that Jacques Cousteau, the French Jacques Cousteau, they say he became a Muslim. When I digged into his life, I read his biography. Actually, I went and I even had footage of his grave, and he's Catholic with a cross on his grave, and they say he became a Muslim because of this. He never said that, he never mentioned it, but it's very known in the Muslim world that Jacques Cousteau became a Muslim because he discovered this scientific
I always heard that.
miracle.
I heard Neil Armstrong, found something and so on. So
he became a Muslim. He heard the azan on the moon.
Yeah, it is strange how many things get made up. But
The thesis. The concept of mathematical miracles in the Quran, distinct from scientific miracle claims, posits a divinely ordained numerical structure underpinning the text. Muslims categorize these phenomena into three main areas: precise word frequencies, intricate numerical patterns often related to the number 19, and unique structural relationships within specific surahs or verses. For Muslims, these perceived mathematical miracles hold significant importance, often presented as undeniable evidence for the Quran's authenticity and divine authorship. Here's Dr. Shaber Ali on the significance of such numeric miracles.
And this is what we do find, that for singular entries like this, you find that there is an amazing correspondence. There is a correspondence between the entries for Satan, which is given as shaitan in Arabic, and for angels, which is malaika. So it's 88 mentions of shaitan, of Satan, and 88 mentions of malaika. This life and the life hereafter are in contrast. As we say, work for this life, but don't lose sight of the hereafter. And this is the subject material of sermons on Fridays. It turns out that the word for this life, dunya, is mentioned in the Quran 115 times, and the word for the life hereafter, akhirah, is mentioned also 115 times. So to think that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was keeping all these numbers in his mind and making sure that these contrasting words come out like this is too remote. And the most likely explanation for this is that it is God who is behind the Quran and controlling and supervising the entire revelation, and even the process of compilation to make sure that the book that we will have in our hands today would have this amazing phenomenon about.
The assertion. The purported mathematical miracles in the Quran face significant scholarly challenges. Claims of precise word frequencies often rely on selective counting, manipulating data to fit desired numerical outcomes. This method inherently lacks objectivity and academic rigor, undermining any statistical validity. Such cherry-picking within a large text inevitably yields numerous coincidental numerical patterns. These miracles are not explicitly highlighted in the Quran itself, suggesting a modern, retrospective imposition of significance rather than inherent divine design. More complex systems, like those based on the number 19, use unconventional verse numbering, or disregard textual traditions. These subjective methods introduce inconsistencies, invalidating their foundational premises and making independent verification problematic. Conflating numerical patterns with divine authorship risks reducing the Quran's profound message to a mere puzzle. When these patterns prove unreliable, it can inadvertently weaken, rather than strengthen, its perceived authenticity and distract from its true spiritual purpose. Here's a sheikh who insisted that these so-called numerical miracles of the Quran is bogus and not true.
Is there numerical miracles? People usually tend to find it difficult to distinguish between what are subtleties and miracles. Any person who compiles or writes a book can insert in that book a certain number of things and then claim afterwards that this is miraculous, which is not. This is not the type of miracles that the Quran contains, first of all. Second of all, people have gone so deep in this that they started making up things according to their whims and desires. So they started to say, for example, that the word day in the Quran is 365 times, which is the days of the year. And they say that the month in the Quran is only mentioned 12 times, which is 12 times in it. And all of this is bogus, is not true.
The argumentation. The following are three categories of commonly cited mathematical miracle claims. 1. Claims related to word frequencies and pairs. The word day is claimed to appear exactly 365 times in the Quran, same number of days in a solar year. The word month is claimed to appear exactly 12 times, same number of months in a year. The percentages of the words sea and land corresponded to the approximate proportion of sea and land on earth. The words life and death, man and woman, angels and devils, good deeds and wrongdoings, benefit and corruption, world and hereafter, guidance and mercy, and love and obedience are claimed to appear an equal number of times in the Quran. Additionally, the frequency of mentions of animals and names of the prophets are claimed to be numerically balanced. Claims of word frequency miracles often rely on selective counting and interpretive flexibility. For instance, achieving a specific count for day or month necessitates ignoring plural forms, derivatives, or specific grammatical constructions, which can be inconsistent across different word pairs. Furthermore, such patterns are common in large texts. With enough words and counting rules, statistical coincidence can generate seemingly significant numerical relationships, undermining claims of divine design over human pattern seeking. 2. Claims related to the number 19. This is a highly elaborate and controversial system, with many individual claims. The core idea is that the entire Quran is structured around the number 19. Key claims include: the Basmala opening consists of 19 Arabic letters. The total number of chapters is a factor of 19 by 6. The total number of verses is 6,346, which is 19 times 334, and 6 plus 3 plus 4 plus 6. The first revelation and the last revelation are claimed to consist of 19 words. The number of times Allah is mentioned is claimed to be 2,698, which is 19 times 142. Firstly, the methodology of the miracle of 19 often appears ad hoc and selective. Proponents frequently adjust counting rules to achieve the desired numerical outcomes. Secondly, variations exist in historical Quranic manuscripts and verse numbering systems, which can alter the numerical counts, undermining the consistency required for such a precise code. Finally, in any sufficiently large text like the Quran, one can find numerous coincidental numerical patterns. 3. Claims related to structural and calendaric patterns. The claims of the middle nation verse as the exact middle verse of the chapter. The claim regarding the sleepers of the cave and the number of years of their sleep is an alignment between solar and lunar years. The claim about the number of verses up to the mention of iron correlating with the depth of the Earth's core. The claim about the number of mentions of Noah forming a ring composition. Claims related to the numbering concerning the ants and bees. Claims of structural and calendrical patterns in the Quran, like the middle verse or the sleepers of the cave calculation, often rely on selective interpretation and post hoc analysis. These claims, while interesting, might be coincidental given the vast number of numerical possibilities in a long text. Arguably as coincidences or clever wordplay, not divine mathematical proofs, and divert focus from the Quran's primary spiritual message. Here's Dr. Yasser Qadi on why this concept of mathematical miracles in the Quran is considered a fabrication.
Around 30 years ago, around 30 or so years ago, somebody by the name of Rashad Khalifa here in America, in Arizona, he began propagating a very bizarre theory called the 19 theory of the Quran, the miracle of the 19. And unfortunately, our esteemed Sheikh and teacher, somebody we all love and admire, Sheikh Ahmed Didat, for a while he picked this up, and for a few years he was also propagating this theory until Sheikh Ahmed Didat realized that this person is a very, very dangerous, evil liar and fabricator. And so Sheikh Ahmed Didat rejected this and recanted from this theory of 19. But Rashad Khalifa continued to propagate this theory that there is something of a miraculous 19 repetition of the Quran, and he released a number of books that this word occurs a multiple of 19 times, this letter occurs a multiple of 19 times. Turns out that pretty much all of it was fabricated. Like, who's going to actually sit and count the number of letters or words? So he's fabricating.
The conclusion: the assertion of mathematical miracles in the Quran, while deeply significant for many Muslims as evidence of divine authorship, faces substantial scholarly scrutiny. The methodology of these claims frequently employs subjective criteria or deviates from established textual traditions, compromising their academic rigor and independent verifiability. Ultimately, this attempt to boost the Quran's credibility fails and provides an insight into its man-made authorship. And here's Chris at Speaker's Corner discussed about such mathematical miracles in the Quran.
The first thing we have to understand is the coincidences that are found from a numerical point of view in the Quran. For example, a certain verse, the amount of words that are said, the amount of letters, you can add these up and you end up with a certain outcome, are dependent upon one thing, and that thing is something that we all take for granted. I want us to take a special note of this particular part of the video because I think it illustrates a few things all at once. So in the chapter of As-Sajda, the chapter of prostration, you can find in verse 15 a verse that has exactly 15 words, which isn't in and of itself particularly amazing, but they go on that the 186th word in As-Sajda is the word prostration, and that if you take the individual digits of 186 and you add them all together, which is very arbitrary in and of itself, but let's go with it, you end up with 15. When you take that number 15, you then multiply it by 2. Don't ask questions. And then from that you get 30, and then from that, which just so happens to be the total amount of verses in the chapter. But there's a big glaring fault here. Everything he's said so far, the adding the numbers up, the multiplication, finding out that these numbers all align, is based on one thing. Let's look at the fact that this is arbitrary. There is no reason why you should add these numbers together. What is the logic behind that? Is it consistent? No, they don't. People don't always add up these numbers to get these mathematical miracles. Sometimes they divide, as we'll see in this video. Sometimes they multiply, as we'll see in this video. It's whatever is convenient to get the number that they want to make these meanings synergize and look as if it was intended. But after adding 1, 8, and 6 and coming with 15 and saying, look, 15 is the same verse number that this appears in, he then says that you can multiply this by 2 to get 30, which is the same amount of total verses in the chapter. Well, again, why did you multiply by 2? Why did you do that? Simple answer is because otherwise it wouldn't work. These are arbitrary mathematical expressions to get the intended result. This isn't sincere, it's just figuring out what is needed to get the desired effect. If that means add some, take away some, multiply or divide, then so be it. We'll just pick whatever we need to get the result. But it gets even worse. What happens if we actually don't agree on how many verses there are in this chapter to begin with? Many Muslims don't know this, but the Bismillah, which is recited at the beginning of every single surah or chapter in the Quran, isn't necessarily considered as the first verse. In fact, there's only one surah where Bismillah is legitimately considered to be the very first verse or ayah, and that would be Surah Al-Fatiha, the very first surah. And this is why there is disagreement among Muslims about exactly what the verse numbering should be in the Quran. For example, the Ahmadiyya, as I was having a lovely chat with an Ahmadiyya friend called Khalid at Speaker's Corner, will tell you.
Chapter 43, verse 84, and I call it Sunni numbering because the Sunnis don't count the first verse of the Holy Quran. Yeah, which is really weird because they're actually insulting the Holy Quran by saying that there are extra verses of the Holy Quran that are not going to be there. And the Quran says it is perfect, so it wouldn't have extra verses lying around. You know?
This is the benefit of going to Speaker's Corner and having some actual in-person dialogue with people of different faiths. You get to learn this stuff. So Khalid made the point that my Quran differed from his Quran in terms of the numbering, because he included as Ahmadiyya the Bismillah as the very first ayah of that chapter. However, other Muslims don't. So if there's disagreement about the numbering of the Quran, then how can we say with confidence that this is actually the correct way of knowing what verse it is? For example, in this mathematical miracle this smile to Jenna gave, he said it's the 186th word. What if it's actually the 187th word? That would mean that it adds up to 16, not 15. If it adds up to 16, then timesing it by 2 will give you 32, which is not the total number of verses in the chapter. In fact, historically, these kind of issues weren't resolved until the 1924 Cairo edition of the Quran, where because of issues of different variants and different readings and different numbering systems, they decided to standardize this through a single version that was published in Cairo in Egypt. If the Quran that we use today, the numbering system, only really existed as a majorly accepted version in 1924, that means that the Quran miracles are dependent on 1924's Egyptian Cairo edition. You want to say that, that's fine, but I think that at this point you're just being arbitrary and picking what you want to see. This isn't how we do analysis. This isn't how we come to these conclusions. We're just looking for the answers we already know we want to see. Let's keep watching and see what he says next.
Coincidence? Not convinced? There are 43 chapters after this chapter that do not mention Noah, and there are 43 chapters that come before that do not mention Noah either. How many do mention Noah? Well, it's 28, the number of verses in this chapter.
Were you blown away by that? Was that something that you think was genuinely a good example of a mathematical miracle? Let me explain why it isn't. We know from legitimate, authentic Islamic history, whether from Ibn Ishaq or Al-Tabari, we know that the third caliph, Uthman, had burnt manuscripts that didn't conform to his standardized copy and instead standardized the Quran according to the Qurayshi dialect, and he also took the opportunity to arrange the order of the surahs. He took the opportunity to say which was the first Al-Fatiha and which was the last. He is responsible for both the surah and potentially the ayah ordering of the Quran. If that's the case, then in order for this to be a divine miracle, we have to say that Uthman played a particular role in that divine miracle.
Hi again. I hope you enjoy another 3 logical examinations on teachings in Islam. This will hopefully help us consider closely what are the teaching of the Quran. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.
Thinking with Logical Christ.